decrease student performance in a lesson fail to support long-term learning of that knowledge. And for this reason, it's advisable to incorporate what Bjork coined as desirable difficulties into your teaching. So it might seem at the time as if students are not performing as well, but in fact, that which students find easy is not always what is best for their learning. So this may explain why students frequently use skills which are ineffective, like just highlighting everything, because they find that easy and that makes them feel more confident in the moment. However, when we're aiming for long-term retention of knowledge, a little struggle is actually for the best. So as teachers, there are a number of ways in which we can combat this forgetting, and a review at the start of every lesson is one of those things. Now, reviewing from previous lessons can be done in a number of ways, so you don't have to feel as if you're doing the same thing at the start of every lesson. It soon becomes part of routine and is a good way of getting students settled at the beginning of the lesson. So the most important thing about this review is that it's encouraging students to think, as according to Willingham, this much used quote, memory is the residue of thought. Allowing students access to their notes during this time is somewhat against the point. What we're after is that our students really have to think about the knowledge that they need to recall, not immediately giving up and looking at a vocabulary sheet. So they can initially be quite reluctant to do this, but it's important that they're shown that they're not going to learn if they're constantly relying on their resources. So I tell my students that if your brain knows it can always just flip back a few pages and read the information, there's no reason for it to bother to ever try and remember. And that'll be a big issue in an exam situation when they can't just check their notes. So the first consideration when planning is to decide what knowledge you need the students to reactivate in order to get the most from the lesson you're teaching. You might also choose to use that review as a way of bringing back knowledge that you don't necessarily plan to use in that lesson, but that students need to retain over time. Another important point to consider is that this review or testing should be low stakes. So if we're collecting scores and tracking and issuing sanctions, then these stakes aren't low. The pressures on our students and the temptation to look at their notes is definitely higher. And also these kinds of tests just encourage students to cram all their learning just before the test, and it's not going to help in the long term. So the aim here is not to assess students, but to help their long-term memory. So avoid that temptation of trying to kill two birds with one stone. It's not going to have the desired effect. So on the slide here are some retrieval practice activities. They are all over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook groups these days, so you probably know quite a few already. These ones on the screen are all provided in a PowerPoint on my website, and the original creators are all credited there too. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot out there right now on retrieval practice. Any of these books would be good to take a look at. Another great one is Teachers versus Tech. Daisy, the author of the book, is very keen on Quizlet, which something MFL teachers tend to be quite keen on too. But it is really worth considering, though, how we're using tools like Quizlet and what thinking our students are having to do. So with that in mind, I've also added to this slide some links from my own blog where I've considered some of these issues. So Rosenshine's second principle states that new material should be presented in small steps with plenty of student practice between each. This is because too much new information can overload the working memory and significantly reduce the amount of learning that's able to take place. So to deal with the limitations of the working memory, we can work through new processes one step at a time, practicing each one until it's been mastered. So take, for example, constructing an opinion with a comparative in Spanish or French. There are a number of parts that a student must have an understanding of in order to form the whole. So firstly, students need to have a clear understanding of nouns and articles. They need to understand gender and number and know how this affects the language. In Spanish, they need to understand the difference between gusta and gustan. And in French, they need to understand why parce que plus elle is becoming parce qu'elle. They need to understand the verb ser or the verb être and the adjective agreement. Presenting all this information to students at once, just like I've just read, would be far too overwhelming. And that's why we teach opinions and adjective agreement before we tackle comparatives. Then we present the information in smaller chunks, ensuring that students understand every step of the way. We can do this in various ways, perhaps starting with some activities on mini whiteboards, translating some opinions to refresh that knowledge before adding anything new. We could then maybe work on some multiple choice questions to check student understanding of adjective agreement. Something like Plickers is really useful for this, and in a minute I will talk about that for anyone who's not used Plickers before. So once these initial concepts are understood, we can move on to modelling how to form a comparative, giving plenty of different examples, questioning our students to check their understanding. But we do, of course, need to remember the limitations of our memory. If students appear to have mastered this at the end of the lesson, that's great, but it's going to need revisiting a number of times before it becomes part of their long-term memory. So another area where it's useful to introduce new information in steps is tackling certain types of exam question. So for example, at GCSE, students are expected to describe a photograph in the speaking exam. So to begin with, students are often unsure of what's expected, and they might just list a whole load of nouns that are associated with the picture. So many teachers choose to use some sort of structure, for example, this PALM WOJ, people, action, location, mood, weather, opinion, justification, to help students form their answers. When first introducing this, the cognitive load on the student would just be far too great if they were told to do all the elements at once. So to ease that load, you work on the people element first, ensuring they understand the structures they need, applying them to different photos before moving on to action, location, etc. Once students are confident with each of these elements, they can be built up to form the whole description. So I mentioned Plickers just now, so I've added this in. So if you've not used Plickers before, I think it is really good. Each student has a printed QR code. Now, usually I'd have one laminated set to reuse, but in the current circumstances, maybe you might get each student to stick one into their book to keep so that there isn't any passing of those around. You set up some multiple choice questions, and students have to hold their card up a particular way around to indicate their answer. And you can then scan the room with mobile phone or a tablet that's got the app installed, and it automatically generates a report to show you how students have answered. You can even show the graph on the screen in real time, making it easy to discuss and address misconceptions. And the great thing about this is that students can't see the answers that others are giving, so they have to think for themselves. And it also takes away some of the anxiety of being wrong, as no one else will know if you're wrong or right. So our third principle, despite the belief that some teachers must limit the amount of time they spend talking in the classroom, Rosenshine found that the most successful teachers spent more than half the lesson time lecturing, demonstrating, and asking questions. In fact, from a language learning perspective, this makes perfect sense. Where are the students going to hear the language being modelled if it's not by you? But questioning in MFL is very different to other subjects, as other than when we're explicitly teaching grammar, we're not often asking questions about concepts. We're asking them to use and practice the language. So like I said, kind of questioning falls into two categories: checking for understanding of structures and rules, and checking students' ability to manipulate and use the language. So the first category is where MFL is most similar to other subject areas. This is where we should be asking as many questions as we can to different students and asking for greater levels of depth and ensuring that all misconceptions are addressed. It's also important to establish how students reach their answers to make sure they fully understand the process. So the example on the screen might be one way of doing this. When students have their own devices, tools like GymKit, quizzes, Kahoot are great for engaging students and answering a large amount of questions without necessarily realising it. This has the double benefit of them practicing for an extended period of time, but also allowing you to download the scores to check where the misconceptions occurred. These questions, as with all multiple choice questions, must be very carefully written in order to ensure that there's a good level of plausibility for each option, so that students need to think carefully about the answer. After all, as mentioned in Principle 1, memory is the residue of thought. Students will remember what they have had to think about. So because of this, the use of apps must be well controlled. Students can often get away with the competition element and stop concentrating on the questions. If this is the case, you may as well not be bothering with the activity if they're not thinking about the right thing, and it's just not going to have the learning effect you were after. So without the use of technology, there are still a number of ways to ensure that you ask a large number of questions to as many students as possible. And one book that you could look for this in is Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov. There's a variety of ways suggested of doing this. So of course, another purpose of questioning in MFL is actually to practice the language. So questions designed for practicing language can seem artificial, but this isn't necessarily an issue. And as addressed in Steve Smith's 2018 book, Becoming an Outstanding Languages Teacher, there's a hierarchy of question types that can elicit more complex responses. And planning this kind of sequence in advance is the best way to get the most out of it. Of course, we know that time constraints might make it difficult to hear language produced by all students in a class, and maybe not just time constraints, but distancing restraints at the moment, especially across a Key Stage 3 class or a large Key Stage 4. You could try an electronic method like Socratic or quizzes, which allow students to type in responses, or the good old-fashioned mini whiteboard, depending on your preference. So Rosenshine's fourth principle advises the use of models, worked examples, and teacher thinking out loud to help students solve problems faster for themselves. In MFL, there are a number of different problems that our students might need to solve, from conjugating a verb to constructing an opinion, translating a text, to answering a reading comprehension question. The key to this is that we want to reduce the cognitive load our students are facing, reducing how much they're having to think and what they're having to think about, to make it easier for them to take on the information that we need them to. So let's take translation as an example. In this case, a visualizer is particularly helpful for modelling, and I don't know about anybody else, but I am really missing mine and I'm going from class to class at the moment. So rather than just telling our students that we want them to annotate a text, we can use a visualizer to show them step by step what it is that they need to do and explain our thought processes. So without this explanation, our students are likely just to jump straight into the translation in front of them without careful consideration of the structure of the text, the grammar, the vocabulary knowledge that they're going to need. Providing models is also really useful for writing tasks. So for example, at GCSE maybe, we can provide a task with bullet points and explain what must be covered in the response. And alongside the task, we could provide a model answer. Rather than provide the completed version, we could complete this with the class, discussing the bullet points, demonstrating the planning process, and how we ensure that we cover all parts of the mark scheme or all important processes for our students to understand. Models and worked examples are not only useful for reducing written and spoken language, but also for answering comprehension questions based on text or speech. Teachers can model processes for finding answers in a text, help students tackle these questions themselves in exam conditions. And again, a visualizer is particularly useful in this situation. If you've not read Making Every Lesson Count, I can highly recommend it. There's a whole chapter based on modelling. And the excellent MFL specific version of this book covers broadly similar ideas, but focused in on MFL, and I wholeheartedly recommend getting hold of both of those. So Rosenshine's fifth principle, guiding students' practice of new material, sits between modelling and independent practice. In guided practice, students will need the processes that have been modelled previously and won't be completely ready to practice without being led by the teacher. At this stage, students will need close supervision and lots of feedback. So one of the simplest ways to guide student practice is to use mini whiteboards. This gives you the opportunity to make sure that all students are practicing exactly what they need to, following step by step what you've shown them and reaching the correct answer. So for example, modelling a new grammar point and then asking students to manipulate the language for themselves. This way, students are still having time to think for themselves and come up with their responses, but they're not being left to do it totally alone, and you can quickly check the whole class. A well-constructed worksheet could also provide good guided practice, stopping in between exercises to go over the answers as a class, explaining them, correcting misconceptions, and allowing students to self-assess their work. The important thing is that students are given the opportunity to focus on the area that needs practice, without interference from other elements and with teacher feedback and supervision. There are, of course, tech alternatives to what we've discussed, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. So many of the apps we've already mentioned would allow you to do this. Things like quizzes, Kahoot, also allow for slides of information to be built into that quiz. So that's something that you might want to consider. Rosenshine's sixth principle is to check for understanding. And in fact, checking student understanding and acting upon this is something we're always expected to do, and in one way or another tend to do instinctively. However, too often, checking student understanding has been reduced to a show of thumbs up, thumbs down, traffic lights, smiley and sad faces, to reflect how students feel about their current understanding. And whilst this may give us an idea of our students' current level of confidence, it doesn't let us know what they do and don't understand, or usefully inform our next steps. So we need to decide if we're checking for knowledge of the language or ability to use it in context. And then we need to consider how we're going to go about checking. This, of course, will depend on our purpose. If we're checking understanding to inform our next steps in a given lesson, then the tool we use to assess students may be quite different to what we might use to check their understanding at the end of the unit. Most importantly, part of checking student understanding is what you do with that information. Giving students timely feedback is essential, but can contribute to workload pressures. Giving feedback doesn't have to be an onerous task, so think about your next steps. A poor score on a multiple choice question could just require the correction of simple misconception before answering another similar set of questions. Instead of marking and giving detailed feedback on a whole piece, you could focus on the grammar concept that's just been taught or use of specific structures or phrases. Once we've checked our students' understanding, we need to remember that this really is only a snapshot of the current situation. Will students still have the same understanding in a few weeks or a few days? What about when they're under exam conditions? The other principles we've discussed or are yet to come into play here. Weekly and monthly review of this knowledge is necessary for making these long-term memories. Now, as I said, I did some writing for the Chartered College, and when I did it, I had a good look at this report about assessment in MFL, and I found it really interesting reading. So that slide's there for you in case you're interested in that. So next, the 7th principle encourages teachers to make sure that all students achieve a high success rate during practice. As many of these principles are, this would seem like common sense. And that said, there are a number of complications related to this principle. To my mind, the first issue here is to do with how we are defining success. In many other subjects, I suppose this comes down to the number of correct answers a student can give, and this can't be applied in quite the same way to language learning. We all know, without needing research to tell us, that when we do well at something, we tend to enjoy it more and probably want to do it more. And there's, of course, much more to motivation than that. But on a basic level, it's something we need to remember. The key here is how do we help our students feel successful and confident, and therefore, we hope, enjoy their language learning more. Of course, the solution isn't just to make things easier. Oh, too far. Helping our students to feel successful in their language learning is a difficult balance. Pitch a lesson too low and students can feel the work is too easy, boring, pointless. Pitch it too high, on the other hand, and they can just feel that they aren't any good at languages, will never understand it and should just stop trying. So factor this into the fact that many of us are teaching classes with a huge range of abilities, and we find ourselves with a problem. Clear presentation, scaffolding, structured and repeated practice, logical progression, and effective feedback will all contribute to this feeling of success. We need to use this to help our students feel more confident in the language, and this way they're likely to want to contribute in class more because there's less fear of being wrong. In his book, Teach Like a Champion, that I've already mentioned, Doug Lemov has an entire chapter dedicated to planning for success. And in the book, he says the most effective teachers help as many students as possible meet or exceed a high standard of excellence. To do this, they view the lesson from the student's perspective and then systematically add supports or remove obstacles to success without diluting rigour. To do this effectively, we'll need to consider the importance of scaffolding, which is the focus of Principle 8. Rosenshine's 8th principle encourages teachers to provide their students with scaffolds in order to learn how to complete difficult tasks. And this is a principle that can be applied to any of the 4 core language skills and at all key stages. In teaching students how to tackle difficult tasks, we may encourage them to use certain strategies as supports in order to help bridge the gap between their current ability and the intended learning outcome. So there are some examples here for you that, again, I asked the owners of these permission at the time when I was doing the writing for the Chartered College. So structure strips, when setting a written task using bullet points, you might provide students with a strip so that they can stick it into their books, and that takes them through the task step by step. You might want to include different types of prompts. Like the middle one, step-by-step breakdown and checklists using a scaffold sheet to help them work through all the steps of a task, set out so that they can actually complete the task on the sheet. And acronyms. There's many acronyms being used by language teachers for different purposes, but this is just one example that takes them through a set of steps that helps them prepare before answering a question. Of course, another type of scaffolding would be to use writing frames or sentence builders. These are increasingly common at the moment, and whilst I'm trying to use them myself, I'm far from expert, and there are many teachers freely sharing their ideas on social media, so they're well worth taking a look at. Coming to Rosenshone's ninth principle, it's the aim that the preceding 8 have all been leading up to. If our students have practiced at different times with varying levels of support, then it's logical that we would later want them to be able to do these things independently. We've already discussed different ways of practicing, depending on what it is we're intending our students to learn, and now's the opportunity to discuss how this very structured and well-supported practice can become independent. So as language teachers, there are a number of things we want our students to be good at and be able to do automatically. And how we view these things will often depend on what we're preparing our students for. So for example, teachers might have very different aims if you're not teaching GCSE exams, for example. Before this stage, students would have practiced very specific parts of the task many times. They'll have seen worked examples, they'll have seen what you expect the final outcome to be, and they'll know the steps involved in getting there. So the aim in this final practice stage is to show that students can now complete these tasks on their own without close supervision. It's important that they are now expected to complete the whole task themselves without the scaffolds that you would previously have put in place. So as long as there's been sufficient practice beforehand, this won't be an issue. And if it's too hard, then students haven't practiced sufficiently yet and they're not ready for this independent practice. So Rosenshone's 10th principle and final principle relates to the frequency at which we're expecting students to review their knowledge. Of course, we already know that mass practice will create short-term confidence, but it won't lead to long-term learning. So this will need to be reviewed over time. Spacing practice is most effective for studying a test after a delay, making it an ideal way to apply our teaching when preparing students for an exam that's a long way off. It's particularly important that we continue to bring previous learning to mind, not only so that students are encouraged to remember it, but also so that they can apply this knowledge to a new context. Frequent review allows us to encourage students to link structures learned in one topic to their knowledge of others. So we can encourage this weekly and monthly review in different ways, either through starter activities and lessons or through homework. We could also consider how we're structuring our assessments and if we're requiring students to retrieve knowledge from modules other than the one they've just been studying. Homework policies will of course vary from school to school, but where possible you could consider structuring the homework you set so that it incorporates plenty of reviewing of learning. Structuring this well could take some time, looking at what students have studied and when it's due to come up again, but in the long term it should pay off as students will be more prepared with previous learned language and structures. Importantly though, we must acknowledge that a lot of regular reviewing just happens as a natural part of language learning. We don't teach the present tense and just once and then never return to it. Neither do we do a one-off lesson on adjective agreement and never need it again. These are fundamental parts of language that we constantly come back to and expect students to practice time and time again for different topics. However, we do need to be aware of and plan opportunities for purposeful review when it comes to topic-specific vocabulary that students might forget, or for lesser used structures that don't naturally come up all the time. It's important to consider what it is that you need students to remember in the long term and make sure that they're frequently being asked to think about exactly that across different contexts, different types of tasks, and in production and comprehension language to help them develop that well-connected and automatic knowledge that we are aiming for. So I hope this presentation has given you an insight into Rosenshone's principles and how they can be applied to MFL. I really hope that from this presentation you can see that these principles aren't another fad or gimmick, but another helpful way of summarising some of the points of effective teaching. So there's some suggestions of some books here, and on the final slide, which I'll show you but looks overwhelming, here are all the sources I referred to when first writing about the application of the principles for the Chartered College of Teaching Accelerate course. So hopefully that will be available on the Early Career Hub at some point in the not too distant future. If you remember, you'll be able to access it once it's there, and I'll try and share the link on Twitter, etc. But yes, for any of you interested, there are my references from that piece of work. And that's it, Flavia.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was really great summary and explanation, and really well put into the context of modern foreign languages. That's great. There are a few questions for you. So how many questions should be used for the low-stake quizzes in the beginning of the lesson? What kind of format should
it's kind of a how long is a piece of string kind of question. It depends how much time you want to spend on it, but I tend to like to give them 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the start of the lesson, especially in times like this where I'm running from room to room setting up. So it depends how long you want them to spend on it, but if you have a look at some of those examples on there, maybe they've got 5 different tasks to do, or if it's, I don't know, 10 words to remember. Yeah, it's a how long is a piece of string kind of question, but not loads. You're not aiming to spend loads of time on it. It's let's quickly get this back and move on to the rest of the lesson.
Okay, awesome. There was a question about whether Steve Smith's book addresses primary as well as secondary, I think you mentioned there. But also, just to pull together, there was another question about whether you think all of those examples and principles apply equally to, Key Stage 3, A-level kids of different age groups.
I'd say so. Obviously, they take adaptation each time, but the whole point is that these are the things we can do to help support learning. So obviously, the things you're going to do in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 5 are going to be very different, and the things you want them to recall and revise and those kinds of things. But yes, in general, those principles should apply across the range.
Okay, great. Do you have any specific example or tip for each key stage? Because I think we have teachers from all over the range.
Yeah, I myself teach 3 to 5, so I'm sorry, Key Stage 2 teachers, that's not something I've got at all. Key Stage 3, all of those retrieval starters that I had there, I use. Key Stage 4, for me, I'm trying to do a lot of let's bring back something totally different at the start of the lesson, because let's say we're studying the work topic now, but they haven't done the holidays topic for a long time. So I'll be bringing that back as much as possible. And I think it's very easy to forget to do with Key Stage 5. We can get very bogged down in these are the topics we need. And I think that's something I personally need to consider more, how I'm going to work on that with Key Stage 5.
Yep, super. So just a new question here from Emma. Do you do traditional vocabulary tests, or does the retrieval practice start to replace them?
So it's hard. I think if there are a test where students have been given a specific list of words to learn and then told you will be tested on these at the beginning of next lesson, I think there's a very strong chance that those students are going to cram those words and those words only for that lesson. And I therefore wouldn't say that that's a good retrieval practice. It might be something you still want to do, might be something you're still doing as part of your teaching. I'm not saying not to do those things, but I think long term, they're unlikely to then remember that 10 words that you asked them to learn for Wednesday. Ask them next Wednesday, they may well have forgotten those first 10 words again.
Yep. And I think last question now. If your students have a low level of English literacy, which is preventing them from accessing modern foreign languages, do you have any advice? That's what they ask.
I wouldn't even want to step into that area. I wouldn't want to step on the toes of people who know more about that kind of thing. I'll stick to Rose and Shines for now, I think. I
Okay.
the wrong thing.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, we're out of time anyway. So thank you very much, Rebecca. That was really, really great. Can you repeat to everybody how to get in touch with you if they have more questions? Or...
Yeah, so everything on the slide has got my website on it there. On Twitter, I'm at BexN91. And there seem to be a lot more MFL teachers coming over to Instagram. So if you look on the hashtag MFL Insta, which was set up by Claire Wilson, and I'm on there under my podcast title, so at Page Practice Podcast, and that's practice with a C.
Okay, great. Super. Thank you very much. Just want to say as well to everybody, if you're new to this environment, that, at Seneca, the whole thing about Seneca Learning is that it's a whole set of small, low-stake quizzes. So it fits perfectly well with some of the Rosenstein principles. And if you're looking for quizzes and low-stake quizzes to share with your students, then Seneca is perfect and it's free. So quick tip. Okay, so now we have Elena for a short talk. Could you stop sharing your screen, Rebecca, please? And then, yeah, good. Awesome, thank you. And Elena, you there?
Hi, sorry, my microphone was on mute.
Yeah, no, okay, now I can hear and see. Perfect.
Right. Please let me know if I go over, because I talk too much most of the time. But welcome everybody, and thank you for being here on a Saturday morning. I'm going to talk today about the 20 keys, which is a system of assessment and retrieval practice that I have used for a long time in my department. If you have any questions at the end of this, please just get in touch, and I'd love to help. And all of the information that I'm going to talk about today will be in my blog as well. The 20 keys system is based on the Pareto principle. So it's a bit of a version of it. My theory is that I can't teach my students the entire Spanish language. So I'm just going to teach them 20% of the Spanish language. It's not really 20%, but a small percentage of the Spanish language, and then get out of that 80% of permutations, of combinations. And my idea is, if you teach that 20% really well, then we will get a very secure 80% output from our students. So this system is just a system where I teach. I have developed it through years and years of practice. I sort of wondered what it is that I was going to get our students the A stars and the 9s, and I sort of distilled the Spanish language into 20 items of complex language that I think, if the students use, they are more likely to get those top grades. They are taught gradually, as you will see in a minute. They have a suite of resources that come with them. The 20 keys, these 20 keys of grammar, are revisited all the time, like literally every lesson, not all of them obviously, but they're revisited all the time. I use them for planning and marking. The students use them for planning their own writing and speaking, and for marking their own work. And they help us an awful lot with metacognition and learning to talk about learning. I'm just going to share with you some of the resources that I use in order to use the 20 keys system. These are the actual 20 keys for GCSE. So by the time a year 11 finishes GCSE, they will have studied these and used them time and time again, so that they're very confident with them. And in fact, if I ask my year 11s, can you name the 20 keys, they will come up with like 17 of these without having to think too much. I hope you'll agree that these are really useful. At Key Stage 3, by the end of year 8, students will have done half of those. So these are the 10 keys that they do at the end of Key Stage 3. Another resource that I use with them is the mark sheet. So I'll just show you an example. This is a Key Stage 4 mark sheet, which I'm going to just explain now how it works. That's the top half, which is about marking the piece of writing that I've got in front of me. Students get a mark for communication, which will depend on which one of these statements they're writing suits best. They'll get a mark, rather than a mark, a grade for accuracy, and then they'll get a grade for range and grammar. The grade for range and grammar will be a numerical grade depending on how many of the 20 keys they've managed to hit. The average of the 3 grades then will give them their final grade. And that's how we grade writing. In my experience, those grades are accurate and they match what the students end up getting. The bottom half of the mark sheet contains some feedback, EBI sentences, something to correct and something to perfect. This is an example of a year 9 student. I'll just show you in a bit more detail. So this student had extra detail and well-organized paragraphs. Her writing was quite accurate and she managed to get 9 of the keys. So that all averaged as a grade 6. Here we have the keys that she managed to hit. The one that she didn't manage to hit, I highlighted in pink, and that became her EBI sentence. Then she did some corrections and I asked her to do some things to perfect her writing. This is a Key Stage 3 version of that. So only up to grade 5, level 5. I would highlight the keys that they get something to correct, something to perfect, and it all fits in with where the essay is. All children have, this is another one of my resources, 5 examples of each key glued to their books. You can just have a look at them later on. That's the Key Stage 3 version, 10 keys, 5 examples of each. I have a few resources that I use for retrieval. Most of us use Quizlet, so I've made Quizlet lists, which you can access as well, with all of the 20 keys, the 5 examples. cards. This one in the middle is for them to be able to print into little flashcards. And this one at the bottom just contains the tenses. So you can just use these if you want to use the resources. And the last thing that I wanted to share with you is this. This is a PowerPoint that I made. It takes a little while to get together. But what it is in fact, I might try and share that. I hope I can share this with you. It's just a timed PowerPoint where hopefully you can see.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, so every 2 seconds a word appears. Students think about what that word is in English or in Spanish. If they get it right when the answer appears, they give themselves a tick. The PowerPoint is set up to advance every 2 seconds automatically, so I can just sit back and get ready with for the lesson. At the end of the PowerPoint, they will have seen all the words, will have thought about them, and will have a number of ticks that represent how many they know. The point is that over time, they have more ticks every lesson. And this is very low stakes, very relaxed. The children love it and all engage with it. And it's just one of the resources that I use to support the 20 keys. I know I've gone through that very, very quickly and I've gone slightly over time. If you have any questions, please just get in touch. If you scan that, you'll be able to get to my Twitter. I'm going to be here answering questions. I hope that was useful. Thank you.
That was amazing. That was very quick, but really, really useful. People loved it. They're thanking you a lot here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to move on to the next speaker, but I'm sure they're going to get in touch with you on Twitter to ask you some more questions. So thank you very much, Elena. That was great. Flo, you're there.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Okay, just trying to share my screen now. Okay, lovely, here we go. So my name is Flo Stockley. I actually work with Elena, so we will be talking a little bit about the 20 keys as well. I'm going to be focusing on metacognition in writing, looking at 3 areas and just sharing some activities that I do to help the children thinking about their writing process. So the 3 areas that I'm going to talk about and look at is helping the kids improve the complexity of the language that they are using, understanding the marking process, so touching a little bit on what Elena has shown you all here, and then finally looking at effective planning to help them with their writing. So the first activity, focusing on helping the kids improve the complexity of their writing. It's not the most imaginative title in the world, but I just called it Improve My Sentence. So the idea is they have the 20 keys on the board there to help them include more and more in their sentences to make them more complex. So the first sentence, I would start off and model that completely for the kids on the board, getting them to write it down in their book. So we would start off with a really short sentence. So something, for example, like fui a Grecia, I went to Greece. And what I would do is I would go along extending the sentence on the board and talking through which of the key 20 language features I'm adding to help the kids understand which ones go naturally together. So something obvious like using time expressions with preterite or different types of tenses. And the kids are writing this down to help them figure out which key 20 that they could use. The next stage is the guided practice. So instead of me completely modeling this one and talking it through, what I would do is we would start off again with a very short sentence. And this time I would go to the kids and ask them for their ideas and how they would add the key 20 in to extend the sentences. So I might give them a very quick little bit of time to chat with their partner to come up with ideas. And then we would go together on the board, modeling it with the kids writing it down in their books. Then the final stage of this would be the kids completing some independent practice. So again, they would take a really short sentence and then it's their time to shine with creating a really complex sentence. And at the end, I would get a couple of them to read it out, which some of them absolutely love doing. And they would explain to the class and talk about which key 20 they have added in. And I find it's a really, really good way for them all to share ideas with creating complex language. So the next area that I would look at with the kids is understanding the marking process. And I've actually found that this is a really effective way to help them to kind of improve their writing, understanding the 3 different areas of accuracy, complexity of language, and content as well. So the first stage of this, I would take a wabble, so what a bad one looks like, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. What I would do is the kids would have both these examples in their book, and we would go along and mark them together. So the first one on the left, I would completely mark for them, talking through and explaining how I would mark this, and the kids would write this down in the book. So the first thing I would do would be to look at errors, and I find this is actually a really, really useful way to address common errors in the topic. So you can see here a lot of common errors that would come up with the holidays topic. Next, I would go through and find these key 20 features, so bits of complex language. And I find it's also quite a useful way to explain to kids if they've attempted to use a key 20 structure and they haven't quite done it, explaining what they would need to do to get it correct. So finally, I would give a quick comment on the content. So the wabble on the left, I'd explain that it's very, very short, not much content, not organised into paragraphs. And I would finally show them on the mark sheet that Elena has talked you all through, whereabouts they would come on the grade, talking through those 3 different areas. So the next stage of this would be doing guided practice. So what I would do is then move over to the waggle, what a good one looks like on the right-hand side. And we would go through and mark together with the kids just the first paragraph there. So the first thing that we would do is I would go through and underline any errors and question the kids on what those errors are there. The next thing that we would then do is go through and get the complex bits of language. So again, I would underline, for example, el verano pasado, and ask the kids, what is this an example of a key 20? And then finally, the kids would go through and analyse the rest of the 3 paragraphs completely by themselves, identifying errors, complex bits of language, and then finally looking at the overall content of the waggle, and then coming up with a mark themselves, which we would then chat through as a class. Okay, so finally moving on to the next bit on the planning. Okay, so what I would do with the planning is I would have that template up on the board there. So we would have a paragraph for each bullet point addressed in the writing, and we would concentrate on the content on the left-hand side and then on the language on the right. So what I would do is I would go through and model the planning for the first 2 bullet points. So first of all, I would start off on the key 20 structures and planning their complex language. So going through and modeling to the kids which ones naturally go with the content. I would especially focus some time here on the tenses and showing the kids exactly where different tenses could go in different areas of the essay, as it's something that they do tend to struggle with. The next stage of this would be guided practice with planning. So again, I would give the kids a little bit of time to chat and come up with some ideas. And then together as a class, we would go through and we would plan the next 2 bullet points, 3 and 4, together as a class, coming up with lots of different ideas with the key 20. And then finally, on the left-hand side, just a few short ideas with content, more to remind them of what they want to talk about. So not like really, really long sentences. The final stage of this would be the kids complete their own plan as independent practice, which they would then go on to use with their writing. So that was a very quick tour through metacognition and writing, looking at those 3 areas: improving complexity of language, understanding the marking process, and planning for effective writing. So I've got my Twitter handle up there if you'd like to see any more of the ideas, and I will be kind of publishing some of those templates that I've shared there today, where I've gone a little bit over time there as well, so apologies, but thank you very much for listening.
No problem, thank you. That was great. That was really, really insightful, very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, all 3 presentations so far have been brilliant. We're gonna go for a quick 5-minute break, so you can go to the toilet or just get a cup of tea. And then please come back at 10:25 so we can have our final 2 speakers of the day, which are Joe Dale and Isabel Jones. So please come back at 10:25 and I'll see you soon. And keep going on Twitter. We're seeing a lot of good posts and questions on Twitter. So please go there and let other people know how much you're enjoying today and all of the brilliant speakers that we got for you. All right, see you soon. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Hi. Whenever you're ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if you're going to introduce me or not. Okay, that's fine.
No, I'm letting people introduce themselves. I think
that's fine.
That's
okay,
better.
No problem. Okay, so welcome everybody to my presentation. Thank you ever so much to Seneca for this opportunity of speaking at this virtual conference. I've been following the tweets throughout the session so far. Wonderful sessions and wonderful feedback as well. So you can see on my screen here that my handle is @JoeDell on Twitter. My email address is joedell@talk21.com. I was a languages teacher, French teacher for 13 years, and for the last 10 years, I've been an independent languages consultant, working very, very hard in the last few months in particular, supporting language teachers from all over the world. And the idea of this presentation is to share some of that good practice that I've been seeing in the new normal. Okay, so let's make a start. Lovely. So this is what we're going to try and achieve in the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. As I said, essentially, I'm going to be showcasing a variety of examples of good practice, particularly focusing on different ideas, practical ideas around listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as well as feedback and ideas around COVID-safe ideas that the community have shared in the last few weeks or so. And then we will have time for questions as well at the end. So feel free to put the questions in the chat. I will try and monitor the chat on my second screen, but of course, it's a bit tricky if I'm presenting and following the chat at the same time. But I'll try my best. Okay, so a fantastic example of sharing good practice is this Padlet. So this was put together by Esmeralda Salgado, who's the head of languages at King's Ely School in Cambridgeshire. And she essentially put together this Padlet and then encouraged other people to post lots of ideas onto it. There's lots of ideas there, for example, around escape rooms and virtual classrooms and virtual trips. I'm sure all of you know about the TILT webinars. So TILT stands for Technology and Language Teaching webinars, which myself and Helen Myers have been organizing since March. We've done over 50 so far through the Association for Language Learning, and you can check out all the recordings on my YouTube channel. And if you go to the ALL London website, then you'll find an amazing database which Helen has put together. And I think this Padlet has been inspired by all these different ideas that were shared by the TILT webinars, such as escape rooms, etc. So thank you to Esmeralda for putting this together. And likewise, here's another Padlet, which was put together by Danielle Warren, who's probably in the room right now, I'm not sure. And again, she was asking the question, about COVID-safe ideas for the MFL classroom. Lots of people, as per normal, from the community then posted ideas onto this Padlet. If you haven't heard of the MFL Twitterati, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't heard of the MFL Twitterati, particularly if you're coming in from abroad, maybe, I think I recognize someone from Australia in the chat, then it's a community of language teachers, language consultants like myself, and language organizations. There's 5,000 members of the MFL Twitterers list, which is the one that I manage. And the hashtag has been used by teachers from all over the world for many, many years. And I think one of the nice things, one of the silver linings of this whole experience, I think, is the way that language teachers have really risen and stepped up and helped their fellow language teacher. And it's been an amazing thing to see. And I think these couple of Padlets to start off with are a great starting point. There's also Sabine here on the left-hand side who's written a post, as you can see, 20+ low prep COVID friendly activities for the language lesson. So again, I'd encourage you to check that out. She's the ideal teacher on Twitter as well. Okay, so again, another example of good practice. I thought it would be a good idea to ask the community to share their top tips around remote teaching. So as you can see, the screenshot of the tweet at the top there, top left, is as you've all been teaching remotely for a number of weeks now, what would you say are your do's and don'ts of online teaching? Please retweet. And then the second question, I've been pondering the question, how do you ensure interaction with your students when teaching either synchronously or asynchronously, playing games, live, setting homework assignments, etc.? And we had lots and lots of really cool ideas that came through. And so what I did was, as I normally do with this sort of crowdsourcing experiment, is I condensed all the ideas into bullet points, and they're all available via that screenshot there. You'll see as well that on my screen, or bottom left of the screen anyway, is the link to all the different references that I'm making on every single slide. And I will be showing my whole presentation. I'm not sure if that's appearing in the chat yet. It's a bit difficult to focus on the two at the same time, but I'm going to give you a short URL to the whole presentation as well later on. So you will get the whole thing as well with all the live links included. Okay. Right, I'm going to play you a little video now, if that's okay, which is a couple of minutes long, but I think it's worth watching the whole thing because, again, I asked the MFL Twitterati to share their experience of how they felt that remote teaching had changed their pedagogy and if there had been a pedagogical shift during lockdown and obviously and beyond now that we're back face to face. And I've made a compilation of all these different tweets. So I'm going to play this video for you now, if that's okay. And then I'll carry on talking in a couple of minutes, if that's all right. Here we go. There we are. So I hope you found that interesting. I find that really, well, quite moving actually to see all those different messages, but certainly, well, hopefully that's resonated with you as well. So now we're going to start off by looking at some listing ideas. This was shared by, as you can see, sorry, I can't see the link at the bottom of this screen. Anyway, this was based on the sort of the listing pyramid idea. So in the Google Slides presentation, this teacher has used the insert audio function, which I'm going to talk about more in a second. And as you can see, it says, listing pyramid start at the top and right. What you hear, the sentence gets more and more complex each time. So this is based on the work of Gianfranco Conti, and seems to be very much in line with how lots of people are practicing listing skills. And obviously, there's also the book that Steve Smith and Gianfranco Conti put together recently, which I'm sure people can share in the chat if you haven't heard of it already. Okay, so the actual practical elements of being able to do this, I would recommend using a tool, online voice recorder. You could use any sort of tool which allows you to record audio and put it up into Google Drive, but online voice recorder, again, you can see the link at the bottom of the screen there, is really handy for this. You then have to basically put it into Google Drive. You need to make it a shareable link by right-clicking and making it available to either anyone in your domain or anyone with the link, and then everyone will be able to hear it. So in a school environment, it'll be anyone from your domain. And then in Google Slides, you go to Insert Audio, and then you can add audio into your Google Slides presentation, which could be good for speaking practice or for audio feedback. Again, once you've inserted the audio into your presentation, you can then format it. You can also right-click the little loudspeaker icon and replace image. So you could actually have like an image, which when you click on it, it'll play the audio. I've seen a nice example of that with Bitmojis as well. So that's worth checking out also. Okay, here's Mark Connolly. I've got a minute and a half of audio here of him describing some ideas on how you can use the insert audio function in the World Languages Classroom. He's from the States and he's done a Tilt webinar for us as well around use of audio. Here we go.
Hi there, my name's Mark Connolly. I'm at SR_Connolly on Twitter. I saw recently that Google announced the ability for users to embed MP3 or WAV audio files right from Drive into slides. That's pretty exciting. That's something I've tried to do awkwardly for the last few years, but now the ability to do it native right in Drive and slides is pretty exciting, like I said. For individual students, this means tracking speaking samples throughout the year. It could mean narrating scenes or picture sequences akin to old AP exams. It could mean creating sort of interactive, clickable images to describe school or family or city scenes. It could also be an audiobook, whether that's an interpretive reading, a sort of audible version of something, or it could be an original narrative, which would be even more interesting. At the class level, they can do all the same. They can contribute to larger projects. They could even contribute perhaps to more complex narratives, an original story, even a choose your own adventure. It could be a point or counterpoint on a hot button topic or a topic that students care about. I'd also be interested in creating interactive listening activities where students have to match an audio to a scene or vice versa. So those are just a couple of ways that I've thought of before the more broad release of this function, ways that I've thought of bringing this into my classroom.
Okay, so thanks to Mark for that little bit of audio. I've been trying to answer some of the questions as well in the chat as well as on Twitter, or retweet things on Twitter. So it's all good fun. We're multitasking. Okay, so this is a really interesting tweet from Rachel Grice. As you can see, she said, can someone please remind me what the decisional rules are about core repetition and speaking work, which is obviously, very much at the top of our minds, particularly in relation to speaking in the classroom. If we can't move from the front, if we have to be able to do everything, with the social distancing, how do we do that? What are the official guidelines? And as you can see, Steve has said, my understanding is there are none. Baliseco inquired with the DFE and there was no response. And then, as you can see, Claire has talked about the fact that ultimately it's down to the school, the head teacher and their risk assessment, which I think is, well, not being political, but pretty poor that the government haven't given, clear guidelines, but then maybe they would be liable as a result of that. I don't know. Okay. And then this is the reply that Claire got from the government when she asked about speaking or singing in the COVID-safe classroom. And very disappointingly, in my opinion, she was given this sort of like blank response and didn't really address her question at all, just giving a basic link to advice around coronavirus strategies or against people catching coronavirus from the government. So there we are. Okay, moving on. A really nice tool, I think, for practicing speaking is Quicker Conversations in particular. Quicker is spelled Q-W-I-Q-R. This was developed by a physics teacher in the southwest of England. And of course, language teachers are normally leading the way on the use of technology. And so language teachers jumped on it straight away to see how it could be used. The original way that most people were using it was with attaching audio to an individual QR code for feedback and wall displays and what have you. But then the developer created this Quicker Conversations feature, which allows you to have asynchronous threaded conversation thread with students. So of course, for conversation practice for languages, this is absolutely brilliant. Normally I would demonstrate this live, but I'm limited on time. So here's a YouTube clip on how to do this. But essentially what you do is you start what's called a Quicker Conversation. You then share the link with the students. So I could do this sort of like live in the chat, as it were. You can then all record your audio. It will then all appear on the screen. You can also moderate all the audio as well. All the audio is saved in servers in the UK, or if you're from the EU, then it will be saved in servers on the EU. And you can also lock the conversation once all the audio has been recorded. You can also add images and text, all for free. The audio is stored there for 3 months, but if you want it to be there permanently, then you have to pay like £1.50 a month, and that's all. So it was created by a physics teacher. It's a brilliant feature, and he's told me, because I've had quite a few chats with him, he's told me that he's not going to make the conversations option paid for. It's going to carry on being free. So I just think it's wonderful. So do check that out as well. Here's a blog post I wrote for the Linguoscope Facebook group, Modern Languages Teachers Lounge, which at the time was public. It's now private, which means I decided to take the article and put it into a Google Doc, which is at the bottom link there. And essentially, I've shared all my ideas around speaking and listening skills using technology over many, many years. And it took me a couple of days to write this, but it's had a lot of Twitter love, as well as on Facebook as well. And you're free to use it to practice speaking asynchronously or synchronously in the classroom. I came across this YouTube clip recently. This is a Chinese teacher from the UK who's based in London, and she's talking about 3 online voice recording tools: SpeakPipe, Voku, and Record MP3 Online. Record MP3 Online has had a big update recently, and it's similar to the sort of quicker conversations idea. But if you're looking for a quick and easy way of getting the students all to send you audio on a cross-platform or a device-agnostic website, then Record MP3 Online could be really useful for that. It doesn't require the students to have an account. It just needs to put their name, and they can make up a name, of course, and everything's sent straight away to your account. So as a teacher, you have to have an account, but the students don't need to. So do check that one out by that video. And I think it's another interesting idea around speaking. Flipgrid, I think Jane is in the room with us right now. So I'm a big fan of Flipgrid for asynchronous speaking practice. Jane has been for many years now. So in this example, Jane's done a Flipgrid short whereby she's, as you can see, she's on the video, she's got an image, she's annotating over the top, and everything can be recorded in like a flip learning model. So she's practicing some grammar there with her students. Great stuff. On the right-hand side, she's got a screenshot of what looks like a PowerPoint. So she's talking about the passé composé using être as the auxiliary verb. So everything is being recorded and saved into a grid, or a group as it's now referred to. On the left-hand side, you've got a video from a teacher called Sam Carey, which is Kary. He has a YouTube channel called The New EdTech Classroom, and he's done lots of videos around Flipgrid as well as lots of other videos around educational technology, worth checking out as well. He's done a recent one on assignments, setting assignments in Flipgrid as well. And then you've got Jess on the right-hand side, just talking about how Flipgrid could be used, for example, for whiteboard and blackboard work, for stop motion animation, and what have you. So if you've not seen Flipgrid before, the idea is you have like a grid, now referred to as a topic. You have a class, which is like your group. And so you can have unlimited groups, unlimited topics. So in a topic, the teacher could record a question in the target language, and then the students asynchronously can then send all their answers to the topic. You can moderate all the videos as well. There's lots of other things. If you go onto my YouTube channel, I've done many sort of how-to guides on how to do this in other webinars, but I haven't got time to do that right now. And there we are. Another idea, you've got a screenshot there of a school in the Middle East talking about Flipgrid and how it sort of, it may not be face-to-face, but Zoom, Flipgrid and Hangouts are the next best things in relation to speaking practice. You've got screen recording there as well. That's another option in the website version, which I'd really encourage you to have a look at. In other webinars, I've done an example using Google Earth, recording my screen in Google Earth, clicking on the I'm feeling lucky option on the left-hand side, which basically will take you anywhere in the world. And a little bit like a sort of dynamic photo card practice idea, you can then talk about, when you're like hovering over the globe, about what the children can see and get them to say those things in the target language. Like I can see a river, I can see a mountain, I can see a town. Then you can drag the little peg man onto the pin, and that will go into Street View. And then again, you can say, okay, so what can you see? What is the weather like? Although like the Palm W ideas that we've had earlier can be really useful for that as well, I think. Here is what's called a jobber-like community. So Francois Stalder, who's done a Tilt webinar for us, he has this regular meeting, which I've attended many of them, and it's just language teachers, particularly from international schools in Europe, have been sharing ideas. And in this particular one, we talked about Flipgrid and how to do asynchronous practice, and there's a few ideas there of how to do that in the COVID-safe classroom. This has been going down a storm with people using Flippity Randomizer. Feel free to say in the chat if you've been using this. So again, I haven't got time to show you this like live, but basically you click the spinner, they all spin on the screen. And if you're using sentence builders, you can put in all the items in the different columns in the sentence builder into Flippity, and it allows you to practice, say, translation activities or speaking activities or writing activities, either remotely or in the classroom. And there's a Chrome extension called Helper Bird, which you can then highlight the text on the screen. You can then right-click, click Helper Bird, Tools, and what's called Immersive Reader, which is a Microsoft tool. And that will allow you to read back the text in the target language, which is very nice. And it recognizes the language automatically. Again, if you look at other tutorials on my YouTube channel, then you'll see me describing this in detail. This is what the sentence builder looks like. So this was taken from the work of Vincent Everett, who I saw talking about this in a Linguoscope webinar using Wheel of Names. And I just took the idea and put it into Flippity. This is Mike Elliott MFL, head of languages in the south of England. He's combining Flipgrid screen recording with randomizer. Again, I'm not going to play the video right now, but if you watch it, you'll see him flipping the Flippity randomizer and then talking about the fact that he's then repeats the phrase and then he then translates it. So it's pronunciation practice and it's translation practice, and then all the videos are then saved automatically to the one topic in Flipgrid, which is you know, a safe and moderated way of doing it, I think. This is another activity with Flippity Manipulatives, this one. So the idea is that you can record some audio using a tool called Vocary, which I mentioned earlier. You put it into Flippity, into this particular template. All the instructions are on the Flippity website. And then you drag and drop the tiles into the correct order according to what's said in the audio. So really nice. And the audio is deleted after like 3 months, but you can then just re-record another version of the audio and you're good to go. And it randomly reorders the tiles each time you load the page. Here's some examples of people talking about the Flippity on Twitter. So here, for example, you've got Alice Smith School in Malaysia. You can see here as well, you've got those little perspex barriers between the children as well in the COVID-safe classroom. And yeah, they're just using Flippity Randomizer to practice. And you've got various other people talking about how they're using it. Catherine Bellas, or Mrs. Bellacat on Twitter, sent me this via email, and she gave me permission to share this. These are lots of practical ideas on how you can use Flippity Randomizer in the classroom from a teacher, which is just great to see. And again, I would encourage you to check that out. Google Forms. So I created a Google form showcasing different question types that you can have. Again, I'm not going to show you this live. I've shown this in many other presentations, so feel free to have a look at it. You can see you've got the links here as well. So how to do things like reordering words, how to do speaking and listening practice with a Google form, lots and lots of nice things. Here's an example from Facebook, which a Spanish teacher created based on the example that I shared just now. So you can see that she's using sentence builders and then the images as multiple choice and then narrow reading activities. Lots of ideas there. This is one from Esmeralda Salgado, I've mentioned already, talking about feedback. So she's given some nice sort of techie ideas around feedback. I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. She also talks about Hattie and the importance of feedback. And also, obviously, Dylan William talks a lot about feedback as well. So there's lots of technological ways of doing this. Literally yesterday, I worked out, based on the work of Esther Park on Twitter, I worked out how to do this personalized animated GIF. And the idea is that you can then take it, you can then create it, put it into Google Keep, and then drag and drop it into Google Docs or into Google Slides. I'm sure you could do the same thing in the Microsoft environment, but that's quite fun. And it's had a lot of Twitter love in the last 24 hours. Mini whiteboards we talked about earlier. So using whiteboard.fi, here's some suggestions from the community on how you can use mini whiteboards, either the physical mini whiteboards or using whiteboard.fi. Talking of whiteboard.fi, if you haven't seen this before, this is like a digital way of doing mini whiteboards, which proved very popular during lockdown. Here's some feedback from different people. My favorite one here is Ms. Ganson, who's saying, thank you very much. I will think about ways I can use it in my class. Thank you again for whiteboard.fi. It is the highlight of my lockdown. I think my year 10 will be forever grateful to you for it, which is just lovely. So there we are. Moat, if you have not seen Moat before, it's a Google Doc. It's an extension that works in Google Docs, Slides, and Classroom, and allows you for free to record up to 30 seconds of audio feedback in the comments area. If you pay up to, I think it's £40 per year, then it allows you to get a multilingual transcript as well, and you can record up to 90 seconds per bit of audio, but you can use it for free for 30 seconds. It's wonderful. And if you do a search for it on Twitter, you'll find it's a game changer for lots of language teachers. Just a bit of a plug. I do have to make a living while doing this as well. And yeah, if you're interested in asking me to do some remote webinars for you virtually, then I'll be delighted to hear from you. Here are 18 example sessions of things that I can do for you. Just have a look, see if there's anything that jumps, and I would love to do a session for you, for your department, for your school, etc. And there's the presentation. There we are. So I think we've got 4 minutes for questions, but I'll put this in the chat as well. I know that was quite quick, but we are recording this. I will share this on my YouTube channel as well. Over to you, Flavia, while I put the link in, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was amazing. People saying that their brain hurts with so much information and useful tools. So thank you. That was brilliant. Yeah, we do have a few minutes for questions. So
Great.
First question, how would you support a Key Stage 5 student that has missed work during lockdown and is struggling to cope with the demands now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that screencasting would be one idea. So in other words, if you've already got your existing PowerPoints or Google Slides presentations, if it was to say a PowerPoint, you can then record a voiceover, save it as a video, or you could use a tool like Loom or Screencastify and record the screen and then share the PowerPoint with that particular student. And then of course, it wouldn't be just for that one student. You can then use those resources the following year to help, because who knows what's going to be happening next year. But you can, I'm not saying that you would make a personalized resource just for that one student. I would make a generic resource around that particular PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation, and then share that with the student. So in other words, creating like a flip model, creating some video resources. You could use Flipgrid as well if you wanted to, and share videos in a particular topic. Those sorts of ideas, I would say, would be the way forward.
Yep, sounds good. There was the other question when you talked about adding recording to PowerPoint and slides. The question was, do you think those recordings should be your own voice, or maybe you should get a native speaker or find a recording of a native speaker? Does that matter?
I think it doesn't. I think it's a great question. I think there's arguments for both. I think the children probably would prefer you as the teacher to have for you to use your voice, because that's more, if you like, intimate or personal to them. That's the voice they recognize. That's the voice they associate with their language lessons. At the same time, I can totally understand the idea of suggesting that you have an assistant, a native speaker to, if you're lucky to have an assistant, but a native speaker to record the voice on your behalf. So from a pronunciation point of view, you could argue that it's better to have the native speaker. From the personalization connection point of view, motivation point of view, I think having the class teacher is much better personally. So a bit of both, really.
Yeah, I guess. And final minute, there were a lot of questions about actually this adding sound to slides. Do you think you can go over it again? Because people were a bit confused.
Yeah, sure. I mean, okay. So what I can do, if I go back to the slide, and let's see which one it is. Let's go back.
I think that's better than just me asking all of the questions one by one.
Okay, so basically, to record the audio, you can use different ways of recording it. It just has to be able to upload to Google Drive. So I would suggest that online voice recorder, the links at the bottom there, is a nice way to do that, and it works on any device. So online voice recorder allows you to record the audio in the browser. You can then edit it. In other words, remove the beginning, remove the end. Then when you click save, it saves as an MP3 file automatically. You then have to upload that MP3 file to somewhere in your Google Drive. And once it's in Google Drive, what's important is that you right-click the audio and you make it what's called a shareable link. So if you click, I think it's get link, it says, and then the sharing options come up, and it will say restricted. So if you click on the restricted option, it will then either say, depending on your situation, it will either say share only with your domain or anyone with the link. So once you've done that, you then go to Google Slides, you click the insert menu, you select audio, it will take you to your Google Drive. I normally recommend clicking on the recent option because that will be the most recent audio there, because it's searching for MP3 files. You select the audio and then you then insert it. And then on the next slide, as you can see there, I've clicked on the recent tab, or the screenshots of the recent tab. You select the audio, you can then format it. You can change the color. If you want to change the image of the loudspeaker icon, you just right click it and you select replace image, and then you can then add your own image which means that when you run the slideshow, you can click on that particular image and it will play the audio. So you could, for example, have a Bitmoji. So I've seen an example of a Bitmoji classroom with the Bitmoji character there. You click on the Bitmoji, they then give a clue in the target language, and the answer is somewhere in the room that you then have to work out as a visual clue, which is quite fun as well. Hopefully that's clear now.
Yeah, I think that made it a lot more clear. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
And thank you very much for doing this presentation. It was really, really, really great.
No problem, my pleasure.
So
I can answer any other questions on Twitter as well, no problem at all.
Yes, that would be great. Just go for @JoeJO and then he'll get back to you.
Thank you.
So now next up and final speaker, Isabel Jones. Let me just, before Isabel starts, there is a way to add Seneca as a custom tab to your Microsoft Teams. I'm going to share the tutorial again on chat. So if you use Microsoft Teams, you can add Seneca to Teams already. So it's really easy to use. Plus, it's auto integrated with Google Classroom if you use that. So I'm going to share the links on the chat tutorials. So Isabel, if you're ready there.
Okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
So before I start, I'll just share my screen. It's probably easiest. Okay. Share my screen. Okay, so good morning. I'm really looking forward to doing this, but to follow Joe Dell is going to be a really tough act to follow. Thank you very much to Seneca for giving me the opportunity. My name is Isabel Jones, and I've been a teacher a very long time, 27 years to be precise. And I teach French and Spanish, currently at the Macclesfield Academy in the northwest of England. I have also been head of languages in 2 different schools over more than 18 years. And I'm a proud member of the Association for Language Learning that really supports all language teachers. And I will agree with Joe that it's been really great to see how all language teachers specifically have come together as a result of the lockdown. It's really quite inspiring. So you can see here, I have put my Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. I love sharing things on Twitter. I also have I'm quite active on Pinterest. So I've put my Pinterest handle there. I share a lot of resources, particularly for A-level on Pinterest, if it's of an interest to anybody. And all my the speeches that I tend to do end up on my blog here. On the first page of my presentation. So this is all about no travel, no problem. As we know, we are in a situation now where we really cannot take children abroad. We cannot really give them this carrot of one day showing them that languages are not just spoken in the classroom, they're also spoken by real people in other places. So before I kind of give you ideas, hopefully, on how to go around this problem, because it is a problem, I'd like you to think about what makes a successful trip. Now, I have got, over my career, I have done a really wide range of trips. And some trips, let's say, were more successful than others in terms of how they get the children to engage with the country and with the language. So as far as I'm concerned, successful trip is an opportunity to open horizons. It's an opportunity for children to understand that there are different places in the world that might look different, feel different, and there's no right and wrong. It's not better or worse than where they live. It's just a different kind of place. It's very important because often when we compare, there's always one that gets the upper end, and that's not what I want them to do. It's also about making memories. Languages are about people, and it's really about making memories. Whether it's something that happened on the trip or some language kind of barriers they had to overcome, these will be long-lasting memory. And I'm sure all of us as language teachers still remember trips that we went on, even as children, and specific things that happened. So it's quite a powerful link that we create there with the language learning. And last but not least, language are alive. It's not something that we just do in the classroom. So particularly now with the COVID situation and us not being able to travel, we really, really need to really bring them alive and really get the children to understand that there are people out there who do speak the language. It's important because, as we know, not all children have the same access to travel and foreign cultures anyway. So we're going to be looking at the countries. So how can we look at the countries, different countries where the language is spoken in different ways? The culture, which is always, in English, culture sounds like a big word. It's quite interesting that in other language, it might not seem quite as big a word. And the people, which is obviously the most important thing. I'm going to share a couple of tools for you to explore the target language countries. So I always say the most important thing is to see that children understand the differences with their usual surroundings. It's very, very difficult if children have had very limited access to other places around where they're from to understand that it's not like that everywhere. You know, there are other things somewhere out there. It's also about challenging perceptions, because obviously with a lack of access, a lot of children have ideas that are stereotypical, that are sometimes really, really far from the truth, and also they can be very judgmental, as I found over my career. It's important to kind of get them to engage with what is happening in the country now. So we're very lucky we've got technology, and it's something that we can do. And also it's really, really important that the content we teach provides a window into the country and what's happening. So very simple example. In a lot of the topics that we teach, we tend to use visuals, or there are a lot of visuals that are being used that do not necessarily show the breadth of culture that it should do. For instance, we're teaching about house. So what is a house? Is this a house or is this a house? They're both houses. The best way to find visuals that are related to the target language countries is also to use, let's say, if you're going to be using Google, Google French, that's actually from Google France, and I put maison and that came up straight away, whereas that would be the English equivalent. So it's really important to get them to look at things that are different from their natural surroundings, so that they understand that, oh, it's a bungalow. That's usually the reaction I get. Yes, there are different things. Bungalows mean different things to different people, and it's really interesting for them to look at that over different countries. In terms of what is happening now in the country, a really effective way to do this is to look at webcams. So webcams, you've got lots of links here to different webcams. Let's see whether I can give you an example. So for instance, there are webcams all over the world, really, but it's really interesting to see that we can, for instance, click on what's going on here. I hope it's still, this one's not working. You will have that risk if you're doing it live, obviously. It's something that could be in your classroom. I hope this one does. Yes, where you can have a look at the seaside, and they could have a look at that coming in to your classroom on a grey, rainy day. So these little things, just remind them that they are, you know, there are different things out there, and it's really, really important. In terms of challenging perception, I always use, particularly for my for the languages I teach, French and Spanish, I always use their preconception of the country. So, for instance, when we have an introduction on Spain, I always get this, oh, it's very hot in Spain, and they're talking to me about the beaches, and I challenge them, is it Spain? Oh, yes, it is. And it's always a little bit of an eye-opener there. Paris, think about the picture perfect Paris. really nice houses, and it's nice to get them to realize that big cities are big cities and they will have often two sides. So using visuals, I think, through what we teach is very important to bring this alive. In terms of challenging perception, there are lots of really good resources as well online, and this is really, really, if you teach French, it's a brilliant resource. It's a project, Photo de Classe, where people are talking about all the different origins of all the different pupils in a specific class, CE2 in Paris. So they interview the parents, they try to find out about their origins, and they also really feature the fact that they are all French. So it's really, really interesting. And it's great to use a small clip of it for personal ID. For instance, they introduce themselves using quite simple language. And it's also, there's all sorts of discussion that can come from looking at the fact, for instance, that they're not wearing uniform, the school setup is quite different, etc. So I can't recommend this resource enough. It's a really good way to bring authentic culture, if you want, in the classroom. And you can do that even with Year 7, because there's a lot of personal ID and things we start teaching at the beginning of the courses that are really easy to do with this. When we talk about the weather, I know a lot of teachers have got weather as part of their classroom routine, and they will say, bonjour la classe, for instance, if you're a French teacher, comment ça va? Quel temps fait-il aujourd'hui? So we tend to look outside the window. Now, it's great to have a range of French speaking, here, put the Belgian, but it's great to have a range of French speaking weather kind of links, so that maybe we can compare weather. Same again, same idea as using the webcam, just to show them that there is something different out there. In terms of allowing to look at the different other countries, TV5 Monde is a really, really good resource. I'll give you an example here. It has got really a lot of resources, not just for France, but if you scroll through, you'll see there's also a lot of things to do with la francophonie and French-speaking countries. So there are loads and lots of resources here that are at our fingertip, really, and we can share when we looking at different topics, whether it's daily routine, introducing themselves, etc., just to widen people's horizon and remind them that France is French, for instance, is spoken on 5 continents. Spanish is spoken all around the world as well. So it's a really good way to kind of show them the breadth of what it is they're learning. Here I've put a little link on popular music. When you're talking about music, it's also a great way to see what's popular in the country. So you click on Los 40 Principales or the French equivalent. There are also lots of Spotify lists there available to get them up to date with the music. What they will also notice is there's a lot of English music. So it's quite good to get them to kind of skip around the English music and focus on the ones that are not. Another thing that I like to do is to get them to look at documents from websites. So for instance, the topic of school is a great one. We can look at menus. This is an example from Spanish school. So this is what they will have in the canteen next week. So because it's updated regularly, you can really make it really instant. Okay, what are we eating today? What are we eating? What's on the menu today? Well, let's compare with what they're having in that Spanish school on Monday. So that really can also lead to conversation, as well as obviously it can be presented as reading material as well, reading resource. windows in the country, qui ponen la télé. It's great to look at big sites like TVA, for instance, where you will have sorts of
Isabel,
yeah.
just somebody on here on the chat says that if you start the presentation, the links may work. I'm not sure, but it's worth a shot.
Are the links not working?
I mean, we only see your slides. We don't see other.
You don't see the links. I see. Right. Okay. So I need to go back into the main screen, possibly. Is that it? Is that okay?
Oh, now we can see it. Yes.
Fabulous. Sorry about that. Yeah, just to give you an example. So it's great also for all the students, because you can do you can just get them to look at headlines really quickly, so that they really realize that a lot of things are happening in different countries, just the way they are in England as well. So it's really about looking at, I hope I'm back on, the comparing what's happening here and what's happening there. C'est quand les vacances is just about talking about, when we're talking about holidays, people's realizing that school holidays are not the same all over France. So it's a great opportunity to look at the map of France, the different areas of France, and discussing why is it that maybe the holidays are not at the same time. And it's a great way to look at geography really in a basic way. So we have got all sorts of tools to explore what's happening in the country now. But we also need to look at culture. Now, culture in English, when you say culture in English, you always think of very highbrow things that are quite not necessarily open access to everybody. The way we need to look at culture is anything that is different from or what we used to in the life we lead, in where we are in the country we live in. So it's really looking at differences, points in common, places of interest, traditions, cultural events, and what's happening now as well. So what's culture anyway? I'll give you an example. Quite recently, the singer Juliette Gréco died. She probably was not well known by lots of people who are not French speakers. It's really about bringing this in, putting a picture on. Who was this lady? Describe this lady. Why was she on the news in France today? So we can really bring these things to all pupils really just by sharing a quick picture and a link highlighting what this person was. So it's really about making this effort to look day to day what is happening in the country. That is culture. So I've provided you a link if you wanted to do that as well. There's a great new app for TV5 Monde Plus for French. It's free and it's really, really amazing. The breadth of resources on there as well. So I can't recommend it highly enough. There's some full French films as well. So if you're teaching at a level, it might be something you want to let your student have a go at in terms of their weekly practice. Also, when we're talking about art, there's a lot of museums, particularly during lockdown, that really changed what they presented on their website in terms of online access. Clearly, now it's not, they have changed a little bit because obviously they still don't know whether they're still open or closed. It's changing a lot, but it's really interesting. For instance, if you click on this, you will see how the Musée d'Orsay, you can actually walk through the Musée d'Orsay and look at some collections, stop, zoom in, discuss it with your class. So if you're doing anything about descriptions, anything about colors, anything about adjectival agreement, it's something that you can really use, and that will give them the impression they're actually walking around a museum. And I know some people are not used to walking around museums, so it's definitely an experience that is worth having. When I say culture is anything, yes, it is. We can look at shopping centers. We can look at the big Grand Magasin in Paris, for instance, and discuss that. Do you have something equivalent? Have you ever been to anything equivalent? What can we do? So it is part of the culture to look at how it's developed, presented, etc. So differences and points in common, I already mentioned this. It's very important to present it that there is no positives and negatives. It's not right or wrong, it's only different. And I really encourage children to really feel that, you know, France is not better than where you are. Where you are is not better than where I come from in France. They are just different places. And it's really important to get them to keep an open mind. And I will always start that. Did you know that? Did you know that in some places this is what they do? And this is not about giving opinion. This is about just finding out what is going on. So for sharing experience, there's all sorts of other ways we can do it. We can look at food pages, TripAdvisors, pages for restaurants, for different museums, places like that. For instance, I quite enjoyed this one on restaurants I visited in Huelva, and then we can discuss this, comparing things that they are unfamiliar with, like flamenco dancing, with things they may be familiar with, Irish dancing. Yes, there are similarities. And it's really quite interesting to get them to compare things that they might not think were very comparable from their experience to something they have no experience of. When we're talking about food, which is something I'm teaching at the minute, for instance, we're always talking about different routines. We're talking about different school routines, different meal times, and we try to link that with, for instance, when the restaurants open, what kind of food is available, and there's so many different resources online to be able to look, not always live, but certainly to look at the sort of food that's available, not just in restaurants, but as I mentioned before, in schools, etc. Looking at famous landmarks, every single famous landmark you can think of they have websites with a lot of the time cameras. If they don't have the webcams, they will have photo galleries to really get pupils to engage with the different landmarks. One of my favorite is to share the Eiffel Tower YouTube videos, either for New Year's Eve or for the 14th of July, which leads into us talking about different festivals and different important days as well. So moving on quickly, so places of interest and tradition, we're looking at virtual tours, museums, Google Maps Street View is great as well, because they obviously can see, let's say, shop fronts, anything like that, and also realize that some places have got very different layout to what they used to, and I think that's quite interesting. A lot of teachers have compiled virtual trips. So I've given examples here of two, one in Google. Let's see if I can click, and I'll have to go back. I'll have to remember to go back in my presentation. So that's, let me check if I can new share. No, you're in. We're in, that's fine. So for instance, it's one that a teacher did for a visit to Paris, all in Google Slides, which is really, really interesting. And you can so click on the passport, etc. And there are a lot of stunning resources that have been put forward by teachers with that. Looking back at this, Genially is being used also by a wide range of teachers to do this. This is a brilliant one where people end up with a quiz to see what they've learned about it. So do explore the links. I've put lots of links in my presentation because I do want to people to have quite a good takeaway from what we're doing right now. But there's loads of absolutely stunning resources that can be adapted. Home videos of people, often we think about videos, YouTube videos, that are more kind of polished, but I think sometimes the more unpolished videos hit home with our pupils, create a stronger kind of link. Always use the grapes for Spanish New Year, the Epiphany Day in France, Dia de los Muertos. There's loads and loads of really, really important days that we need to make sure we bring into our lesson. We did that before, but obviously now I really think that because we can't take them in the country, getting them to engage with the culture and what's happening in the country is even more important. So the best way is to compile your own calendar. There's a calendar here that is for France, that is on the ALL website, the Association for Language Learning. Do look at the ALL website and please do join ALL, because obviously there's all sorts of other resources and materials that can be accessed through the website. But this is just to give you an idea of the kind of calendar and resources we can tap into. So really important we check these events in the press, on the internet, on YouTube, and really try to use them as starters to get into topics or to get pupils to remind themselves periodically that yes, we can't travel at the minute, but things are happening in different countries in different ways. It's really important to use authentic spoken language in class because it will also help people to deal better with listening, getting used to the idea that they will not necessarily understand everything, but it's what happens in exams anyway. And they also get used to the fact that language can be spoken quickly. So these are different techniques, different things that we can be doing. I'm keeping an eye on the time. So I have got this approach to deal with authentic clips. So this clip is one about La Galette des Rois, really interviewing people about where does the Epiphany cake tradition in France comes from. I'm sure you'll be able to find a very similar thing for Spanish. So really the way I approach it is you present it. So you talk about what the video is going to be about. You get the pupils to predict key words that are likely to be in the target language that are likely to occur in the video, and then you just ask them to focus on the predicted keywords and look for extra clue. Ask them to also notice things. I think this idea of taking them abroad, getting them to look at authentic material, it's all about what they notice. They do. Little things do need flagging up to them, but it's good if they notice. You only notice differences when you're aware of your own identity, and that's when they need the support. But it's really, really important to get them to notice differences. So learning about accents, I get this question all the time, particularly if you've got native speakers in the department from different areas or different countries. It's always interesting because they love the idea that, yes, we have got different accents. So it could be that I always talk about North and South. I'm from the south of France originally. So it's really quite interesting to get them to listen to the differences and how some of it might help them, some of it might not. But if you have, for instance, I'm thinking for Spanish speakers from different countries, it's a great opportunity to really get them to listen carefully to the way you speak and also to get used to the different cultures you bring into the classroom. If you're not a native speaker, there's plenty of YouTube, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things that you can use as well. Synchronous exchanges. If you have got strong school links, please do use them and encourage sharing of audio and video. I know there are issues with sharing video, but audio is actually a really, really good way to also get them to get used to different accents and provide, then you will get provided with authentic listening. And you can also do that in exchange for your link school if you're not able to, because we're not going to be able to take them nowhere near our link schools abroad. Live exchanges are great, but they do have issues in terms of timing. and particularly if you're exchanged with, quite a different time zone, it can be quite tricky. But it's great to encourage individual private kind of live exchanges with different classes and different people. Obviously, they need to be a system, and we need to be thinking about safeguarding, child protection, etc. But if you run through a system with your senior management and they are happy with that, then we can encourage people to basically build up their own exchanges one-to-one with pupils from your link school. A really good way to do that, if you want to do this as an enrichment activity, is to get them to prepare mini presentations. Then it's more, they feel more in control of what's going on. And the live exchange can be just talking about what was in the presentation, or if they feel confident enough to agree on a common format before the live exchange takes place. As I say, it also depends on the kind of links you have abroad, but there are lots of different ways through even eTwinning to develop those exchanges and links if you have not got them already through the different members of staff that are teaching your department. Okay, well, this was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but really recap, we need to look at the countries, we need to look at the culture, with a small c, but very helpful, and the people, because pupils need to be reminded that languages are alive and languages are about people, and that's why we love languages. Okay.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That was great. Really, really amazing presentation. We have 3 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So first one, how much time do you dedicate to culture per lesson or per term?
That's a really interesting question, because for me, everything that we do needs to have a cultural kind of input. So for instance, even if you're teaching about, I'm going to talk about a really traditional kind of lesson that some people might be teaching in that way, like items in your pencil case, for instance. Well, you can bring culture with that. You can bring culture by getting pupils to realize that in lots of countries, pupils have to buy all their stationery. You can get online, I'm thinking French, getting them to look at La Rentrée websites, where pupils will look at different types of stationery they will buy. That will get you to look at vocabulary, that will get you to look at prices, that will get you to look at also different school setup. For instance, mini whiteboard, what is it that they're called, etc. So you can really bring something from the target language country into the most basic lesson, really. Usually through visual and through bringing your experience as well of the differences you are aware of between the 2 countries. So it's all about you kind of saying, I know they won't know that, but yeah. For instance, in Spain, they need to buy their own textbooks. In France, they need to do this. Uniforms, there's all sorts of things that we can bring just through our knowledge of the differences between the countries that the pupils are not aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. With no chance of doing exchanges, has anyone gone down the road of pairing students up and then getting them to do Zoom team meetings with each other? So I guess like a pen pal in different countries, but via Zoom.
Yeah,
I think that's a good idea.
That is, you've got to be really quite careful with this, because it also depends on your school setup and the number of pupils you have. Right. If you have got a really strong link, you can build that into enrichment activity depending on the timing, clearly, because if you want to do something live, there's always the timing is an issue. But also the problem with doing something live is that they feel really, really under the, they feel the pressure of pupils. So I think to build the live exchange on something maybe that's recorded and then have a discussion after might actually get them a bit more confident, or to say, right, okay, you're just going to say your name, your age, what you study, and then we'll look at the video and then we'll discuss it. might support that. The problem with Zoom and anything live is the lack of control as well, and we need to really identify where responsibilities lie. Because if something happened that we were not very happy about, clearly there's very little we could do about it. If we did Zoom as well, we would need to record it, which also kind of might throw up issues in terms of parents sometimes not wanting the child to be in any kind of recording. So it's really, there needs to be a system there, but obviously it's a way to bring that exchange in. So I've said, yes, we need to do something like that, but we need to be really aware of our school system to make sure that we do something everybody's happy about.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, we are out of time. It's 11:30, so I just want to thank everybody again, all the speakers. They were all brilliant, and I want to thank everybody who was here on a Saturday morning in joining this conference. Please do make sure that you check out Seneca's free resources for German, Spanish, and French. And go on Twitter, use hashtag SenecaCPD, MFL, Twitter, @, and thank all of our speakers. And also use the hashtag to connect with other people. So a lot of people in the chat asking about other German teachers. Go on Twitter, use those hashtags, say you were on this conference, who else was in the conference, and then you can find colleagues to discuss ideas. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a great Saturday and Sunday. See you.